Hey, thanks for coming back to the channel. Uh, I want to restate why it's important, why the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court's uh, eminent decision regarding the New York Rifle and Pistol Association's a suit against the state of New York and city of New York regarding their concealed carry regimen. That is, you have to have justifiable reason, uh, justifiable in the mind of some cop, to be issued one, assuming that you have the bags of money that it requires. Part of that, and very few people really understand this, part of that whole concealed carry thing is 100 years old, 110 years old, 1911, with the Sullivan Act. And the politicians there in the state of New York and in the city of New York like to say it's 100 and some years old. Yeah, well, that's based on 100 and some years old of corruption, where guns were removed from citizens because the gangs that were owned by Tammany Hall, which were the corrupt politicians in New York City, uh, wanted their crooks to be able to intimidate voters at the polls. That was the reason the Sullivan Act was put there, because the citizens got tired of being bullied by gangsters and started shooting them. And the gangsters went and whined to their uh, respectable respective bosses and said, "Hey, the citizens are shooting us," and they said, "Well, we'll fix that." And they came up with the Sullivan Act that said you have to have a permit. And by the way, the only people that really got permits were the gangsters that were on the payroll of the politicians. So that's the reason, and that generated a whole culture of corruption that's still there in the city of New York and the state of New York. And if anyone that doesn't believe that is living under a rock, frankly. So this energy, about being terrified, and this is coming from the mayor now, Adams. I can't sleep at night, is what he says, because he knows what's going to happen is that the crooked politicians and the crooked cops are going to lose power because they're not going to be able to intimidate citizens anymore. They'll have to issue based on the standard criteria. But here's what's really, really important about this imminent Supreme Court decision. While turning all the states in this country into shall issue concealed carry states, what's more important will be the level of legal scrutiny that is going to be required before any law is passed against the Second Amendment. So the Second Amendment is the only right that does not have where strict scrutiny is not enforced, because no one said you had to do that. So you have different courts of appeal and so forth using, especially California in the Ninth Circuit, using these really low level of scrutiny. It says, what's the common good, right? And so they do this balancing act. That's the only that's the only amendment. That's the only right in the Bill of Rights where a balancing act between a constitutional right and people's feelings come into play. So what this decision should do is what I'm hoping is it will say the Second Amendment is a right, not a privilege, and rights are protected by the highest level of scrutiny, not some balancing act between public safety and a right. It doesn't work that way. It says the right has priority, the strictest level of scrutiny. And because the government, whether it's federal or local, wants to do something because they want to, because they think it's in the best interest, is irrelevant. You cannot affect a constitutional right that way. And that's what's making these anti-gun people so terrified. Because if strict scrutiny is determined to be the level of rules before a law can be applied against the right, then pretty much every anti-gun law, every law affecting the Second Amendment will die. I'm hoping that the NFA dies along with it, because that was a law and it did not meet strict scrutiny. None of them met strict scrutiny. So imagine a world where you pretty much have constitutional carry in the entire country. What happens then? Well, the elected officials in those cities and states that have the most density of crime and the most density of people are going to have to think differently about their citizens. They cannot look at citizens at every citizen as a crook until they prove differently. And they need to assume that every person they come in contact with is armed with a firearm, concealed or not, and they can't do anything about it. They can't intimidate, harass, show me your papers. They can't do any of that stuff. And so the cops say, well, how do we know who the bad guys are? Because the bad guys are doing bad guy stuff. The bad guys will be doing bad guy stuff. Just because you see a bulge in their printing, right, is what we call it, and you think there's a gun there, you can't say, is that a gun? It's none of your business as a cop. Is the person doing something? No. Do you have probable cause to harass that person? No. Can you stop? This is a good one I always use. Can you stop someone on the freeway, on the highway, as a cop, just to find out if they have a driver's license? No. They could be driving without a license. They could be driving without insurance. But you can't stop them to check that, right? You can only do a traffic stop if there's been an infraction or violation of a law that you see that causes you to stop that car. Then you can ask. So if a person is misbehaving out in public, the police can ask, like they tend to do you have any weapons on you? And then you get to say yes or no. But that's the terror. That's the terror, is that the level of scrutiny, if it's the highest level, and I'm hoping that it is, almost every anti-gun law on the books and those proposed that affects the Second Amendment and our right to keep and bear arms will fall. That's what's terrifying these people, these anti-gun people. So I just had to put that out there so that you all know that there's something else, not just the concealed carry thing that's at stake here. And we'll get to see how they rule, and it will fundamentally change the culture of this country. I think for the better. And if you think the last 50 years of arguing about abortion is fun, do you think the anti-gun people are going to go quietly into the night? No. What are they going to do? Well, film at 11, as always. Thanks for watching, and carry on.